And good evening, our fellow listeners. This is Federico Lines of States Rights Radio and
Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports.
And we are here in Restoring the Constitution program. Tonight's episode is the 15th Amendment, the right to vote, and following your state's voting standards. This was a discussion after we discussed the 14th Amendment, Seth and I, and we decided to bring up the 15th Amendment because, you know, it's very important what this amendment entails, but also what it doesn't entail. And I'll let Seth take it from here and let us explain further the 15th Amendment.
Yeah, and I think first pretty short amendment. So maybe I'll just read it. It's the right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And then it's got section 2 is the Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. And, I guess, this was obviously an amendment coming after the Civil War. As the nation was trying to build back from, fighting against each other. And obviously, I agree with the intent of it. Me personally, I would change one word of that amendment, and that would be the right of the citizens. I would change it to the privilege of the citizens, because I've always kind of viewed voting as not really a right, but a privilege, and one that should be taken seriously by everybody who votes. And we're in a point in time where everybody's voting. It's a personality contest every year for president, and for most offices, it's a personality contest, and that's not the way we should be viewing voting.
No, you're right, and that's an interesting word that you would change, and I would have to say that I would agree with you to an extent. Number one, voters did have a right to vote per their state. This was added. This was a post-Civil War amendment, and it was to include whites and blacks, formerly freed slaves, into the voting process. So it is a privilege. You're right there. But what people misunderstand, what people mistake from this is that just because the federal government has given this grant to the sovereign states to give this right or privilege to their citizens, doesn't mean that it needs to step in and control. Now, by that I mean not by what happened after the Civil War, where you had many southern states and Rocky Mountain states that were denying their right to vote on account of race or ethnicity or sex, and creating all these loopholes like the poll tax or literacy test or God knows whatever. There Congress has the right to come in. But to establish national directives on voting standards and counting standards, and I've seen it time and time again where on both sides, Seth, they don't quite understand that, they're not denying the right to vote. They're just, states have a right to do their own standards, and their citizens have to learn how to learn those standards, how to vote. So we don't need a court to tell us or a Congress to tell us how states need to count the votes. We just need them to have our citizens have that right to vote or privilege to vote not be taken away.
Yeah, and that's kind of gets into the problems that we see, and we'll touch on 2020 and what happened in 2020 with the shutdowns and everything. We got this mail-in election, and that was a federal top-down saying to all the states, you have to you have to allow mail-in ballots. And that, by the way, was Donald Trump who signed the executive order. So, Donald Trump's upset that he instituted what he claims stole the election from him. So, shame on you, Trump. But, essentially, elections are supposed to be local. The local authorities run them. And, it's things, we get things like voter ID, which I personally don't think there's a problem with that if the state and local elections want to institute voter IDs, but we shouldn't have a national voter ID law. We shouldn't have, we certainly shouldn't have national IDs, which I think a lot of conservatives are getting very close to supporting a national ID, which I would be absolutely opposed to. These things need to be decided at the local level.
Yes, you're right. And on that note, when Trump signed that executive order saying that, because of the pandemic, states can do mail-in ballots, and of course that's not, what he liked. Cry me a river, Trump. But this what happens when you have the federal government meddle, and from the left and the right. And another point that you made was voter IDs. Yeah, no, I don't believe in a national voter ID. I know many right-wingers and left-wingers. Well, left-wingers are not really supportive of that idea, but I'm sure that Chuck Schumer with Mitch McConnell will find a way to hold hands in that. But I don't believe in a national voter ID. I do, state legislatures state legislatures down by the Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of the Constitution gives power to create electoral laws. Now, those electoral laws are given down to each individual county to obey those laws. Now, I know we're going to touch base on 2020, but I would like to touch base on 2000. And that was where, I made a little quote saying that in reading Bush v. Gore, you realize President Trump had no chance in winning. The might of Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 is stronger than any MAGA protesters. And it's just that, when I started hearing, the Trumpers cry about election stolen, count my vote, not count my vote, it was like deja vu. I feel like I was back in Florida in 2000, where Gores were crying and wanted to count the votes again and all that. And it just boggles the mind that you get this hypocrisy, this sheer hypocrisy. But I'll let you make your point.
Yeah, and that's also another illustration there of how both sides are essentially the same, and we're really tribalistic. It was Al Gore pushing election fraud at the time. Now it's Donald Trump, and you had Stacey Abrams at the state level in Georgia denying. So both sides do this when their guy loses, their guy or girl loses. They push these theories that the election was stolen, and I got to be honest, because I believe we live in a fallen world. None of us are perfect, and I believe there's election fraud in every election cycle. It's just because we're human beings, and that's kind of the nature. But it's whether or not that election fraud rises to the level of stealing an election, and that's hard to prove. And the point is, to me, is when we get these claims of election fraud, there's never any evidence being presented to prove that the election was stolen. It's just narratives. And I look at the Trump case of election fraud, and I don't even think Trump tried to prove that the election was stolen. He just pumped that theory out there so he could get money from his supporters with the Stop the Steal stuff. It goes back to the local issue. You look at 2020, And, I remember Trump was claiming Mike Pence can decide not to certify the elections. And, he was upset with Republicans who voted for the electorate, for the electoral college votes and stuff. And I remember Thomas Massey was, Thomas Massey, conservative, more libertarian Republican. He basically said, well, if Donald Trump wanted us to vote for a different slate of electors, he should have had the Republican states where Joe Biden won send us a different slate so we could choose. But he didn't do that. So it all got down to the local elections. If Donald Trump really thought it was stolen, he could have got the Republican state legislators in some of these states where Joe Biden won the vote there, had them look at it and decide to choose the Trump electors if they thought that it was stolen in their state. But then you get the argument that, well, this is a Republican state. Are we going to say our elections were corrupt? I mean, it's just kind of this you're in this kind of mad thing where there's all these different pieces at play, and it's just the whole arguments were ludicrous.
No, yeah, it is. And you mentioned when he was asking VP Pence to not certify the Electoral College on January 6th. And I said to many friends of mine, since when does the VP have that sort of power? I mean, to my knowledge, it's a shame that it was amendment number 12 that they changed the way of how the president and the vice president was elected. But back then, the VP, and still is, his only power is a tiebreaker. And he's the president of the Senate, but he's a meaningless, power seat. So where did Trump get this highfalutin illusion that the vice president? So this is where I put in another question: is that if you're saying that the vice presidency has this power, would you give it to Kamala Harris? Would you give it to Albert Gore? So it's this ludicrous that invites troubling, invites the other side to say, hey, Trump said this, that the VP has this power, so now Kamala Harris will have this power too.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. It's you're setting a precedent, and a very bad one, and that's kind of where we've come is that like almost every president sets a dangerous precedent that is expanded upon by the next president, and just to sidetrack a bit, I view like gun control. Donald Trump was the first president to ever use executive order with banning bump stocks to use executive order to ban gun control. And now Joe Biden's done it twice. So this is what happens when you set a precedent. Your opponents that you are so worried are going to do things to you if they're in power. Well, you gave them the power with your precedent. I mean,
yeah.
I just conservatives need to start waking up to this and start fighting back against their own guy when they set dangerous precedents.
Oh, the thing is that they're in denial, and it's also scary that they use this because they're in denial. For example, liberals were upset when the Supreme Court said that corporations have First Amendment rights, and on Citizens United versus FEC, and here you see the esteemed governor of Florida attacking a private corporation just because he doesn't like his "Don't Say Gay" bill. Sorry to off track, but this is my kind of thinking of what you're saying with gun control, with setting a precedent or being hypocritical and being in denial. So this type of two-party system has become too hypocritical, too much in denial, and I'm afraid we're really in a deep end that if we don't get out of this, we're going to keep on doing this stuff in denial that it's really pathetic.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we go back to on, all the discussions that we have is kind of, the power that Washington has, or the power that our state capitals have, and the thing is, we're so off track that the government is interfering in our lives so much that both sides are. So it's so important that their guy be elected. Well, if the government didn't have the power that it's taken, we wouldn't worry about who's president, who's governor as much as we do now. I mean, we should want to be involved, and we should want governors, presidents who love the Constitution, and. We might disagree with the issues here and there, but we're all on the same page of trying to defend people's rights and liberties instead of doling out favors to our friends and creating programs, welfare programs, entitlement programs. And this is why it's become so important that we got to get our guy in. And so we're dividing ourselves when there just shouldn't be that power in the government to begin with. And that would kind of lower the importance of these elections, and we wouldn't have all these allegations of elections being stolen if the government didn't have the power that it's taken.
No, yeah, you're right. And, both sides have created these divisions, and yet they come united the same under one spectrum of national centralization of power. So they create these divisions, both left and right, Republican, Democrat, but when they get in, they will find ways to unite us by force with centralized healthcare, centralized education, centralized welfare. So centralized national voting. So that's where it scares me with these two type of political parties, that they speak in a division, but they'll find a way to bring us by force. And that's where this thing of national voting unity is not how this country was established. Or even, that's fine. In the 2000 elections, the standard for Florida was the penetration of a punching of a ballot, and to penetrate it. And there was no recount on dimple chads or hanging chads, etc. But the Democrats looked to the standard in Texas. Texas did have that standard. Well, that's, whoop-de-doo, that's Texas. If the Florida legislature wants to find a way to incorporate that into the law, that's fine. But you cannot have the courts dictate that. So, I posted this question: does President Trump show irreparable harm to his election? And no, because there was no differences of voting as it did for 2000, when Palm Beach was not counting dimple chads and Metro-Dade County was. So that was causing irreparable harm to the petitioner, George W. Bush. Well, Trump was just spewing nonsense that it was just been stolen, but never offering any facts. Here, I think the real affected one was Bush, because they were taking votes away from. They were counting different standards and at different county levels, and the state Supreme Court was authorizing this. And while the U.S. Supreme Court, they're not going to touch any more election cases anymore. They says they're only going to rule on the Bush Gore ones, and that's it. It doesn't count again. That's why I'm glad the Supreme Court, even with 3 Trump appointees, they did not take up a case, because it's they learned their lesson. It goes back to the state legislatures to decide what their standard is. And if Pennsylvania wants to do certain mail-in ballots, or Wisconsin, or even Georgia, and how they count it or not count it, that's up to the state. And that's up to your state and local governments to talk to your state legislature and figure it out. Not the federal government, not the National Congress.
Yeah, and the way Trump did his Stop the Steal stuff. It's just, to me, it's such a sleazy thing because I don't even think that he had such an inept legal team that wasn't even trying to prove election fraud. And so, I don't deny that there are problems with voting machines. There have been stories and mainstream articles in the past, about how easy it is to hack voting machines. Of course, mainstream who we're told hates Trump, even though I have some wild theories about that because they talk about Trump all the time. So I think they love him too. But so I don't deny that it's possible. I don't know if the election was stolen. I don't think Donald Trump really cared to find the truth. That's my big point, because Donald Trump was raking in millions of dollars from his supporters with the Stop the Steal narrative, and he never even tried to find any evidence that it was stolen from him. And that just disgusts me, because, you had Steve Bannon, who, a Trump associate, who in October of 2020 was caught on a leaked audio saying what Trump's going to do is he's just going to declare victory on election night. But that doesn't mean he's a winner. I mean, and he laughs about it, because this is all about grifting and getting and pumping this narrative to get his supporters to give him money and then show up on January 6th and take part in this stupid. The January 6th people were set up. I mean, they were set up by Donald Trump to come there and act like fools. And that's the thing that really bothers me about this, is that I know some decent people who are Trump supporters, and I'm trying to get them to wake up to this, but they're being conned by one of the biggest con men in history, and it just bothers me.
No, you're right. And the January 6 people, it's the first time. I mean, there's been speculations of electoral fraud since, I would say, the election of 1800. Well, no, I wouldn't say 1800. No, not Jefferson, Adams, and Burr. No. The Jackson with John Quincy Jones. There were rumors of electoral fraud, but yet that election, nobody got the majority, so it goes because of the Constitution. See, it goes to the Constitution, goes to the U.S. House. The same way as in the election of 1800, it went to the U.S. House. They picked the winner and all that. And here you have a man like Andrew Jackson, who was, I would say, a pre-Trumper, who was crying the same narrative, Stop the Steal. I'm glad that Andrew Jackson, as he rode to New Orleans, didn't ride to Washington City and did an insurrection. I think he was a little smarter than Donald Trump. But, you've had electoral fraud cases, alleged electoral frauds in presidential elections. But, you take it and you lose it. You lost because the Electoral College says you lost. You didn't get the majority votes, then you'll try again. But there's something about this one that happened in 2020 that it's like they're stuck in denial. They're stuck that they don't want to accept reality. You're right. They're being conned by a con man. And I have good friends who are Trumpers too that, and I see many individuals from Montana, Idaho, Colorado that are just gaga over this guy. And I said to myself in 2015, how can this guy was a Democrat-Republican reform. He was never really anything. And now I just don't understand how they're so gaga with him. But no, you're right. I mean, the narrative of Stop the Steal, yeah, it's to stopthesteal.org and stuff like that. Yeah, he made money off of that, and he showed no proof. He just wanted the governor of Georgia to discertify the results. He wanted just the Supreme Court to intervene. He had Ted Cruz do a brief on Wisconsin not accepting any results that are not into accordance with like Texas standard. And I'm like saying, okay, I mean, why would we want? Why do we have to follow Texas standard? We don't want to follow a national standard. You leave Wisconsin how it is, and we leave Texas how it is. So it was a new. I mean, I would say the 2000. One last point. January 6, 2021. It was bloody. I think one person died, if I'm not correct. Yeah. Ashley Babbitt. It wasn't as bloody as 1876. There, it was really bloody. And, it didn't erupt on the halls of Congress, but it was more bloodier than January 6th. And, but still, in 76, Rutherford B. Hayes was proclaimed the winner. The Democrat says, well, I mean, there could be electoral fraud. I have no, there were 2 states that were not reaching a vote count, but James Tilden was it the Democrat? I think so. No,
sounds right.
Sounds right. He said, you know what? I mean, Hayes won. It could be stolen, but I'm not going to say anything, and I'm going to just go home. So it's just but just one last thought, and then it's just ludicrous. You're right, ludicrous and disgusting that they follow this buffoon.
Yeah, and I think when we look at this being a local issue, and the local government, state government should be running elections. We get interesting ideas. Like I think this ranked choice voting that has been tried in several states is a good idea. I don't know if it's what should be done in every state, but I think states should try different ideas. And I know there's a lot of people upset with ranked choice voting on the Republican side because Sarah Palin lost her run. She ran for Congress and lost to a Democrat. But if people actually knew what was going on in Alaska, she had no business running if you look at it, because there was already a Republican who got in, and then she got in and basically said, well, I should be the standard bearer of the Republican Party here because I have national name recognition. And so they started blaming this other Republican who got into the race first. But anyway, I mean, the ranked choice voting, though, is a good idea that I think, to me, we need to get away from the tribal politics, the partisan two-party system. And ranked choice voting is actually a way that if we use this correctly, we can start getting independent people, get libertarians, get other third-party candidates elected. And I just think it's something that should be considered, and that's the great thing about that is it's being done locally. It's being done at the state level, and they're trying something.
Yeah, and you mentioned third-party candidates and independents. I'm all for that. In fact, in 1992, I was only 13 years old, or 13 years old, and I actually kind of got intrigued with Ross Perot, and I thought that he was a man who really knew what he was talking about balancing the budget, not really putting term limits in Congress, but stopping the bureaucracy that was Washington, D.C., but yet again, this is where the hypocrisy of both sides come, of both Republican and Democrat. And again, the sense of denial. But after the 92 elections that, Ross Perot did take votes away from George W. Bush, and of course proclaimed the winner for Bill Clinton, which I think Bill Clinton would have won anyway, because I think George Herbert Walker Bush was not that popular. Yeah, he kind of got the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and yada yada yada. But as far as I think Bill Clinton would have won with or without Ross Perot. But after the '92 elections, both parties got together and really made the rules so difficult for third party and independents that we're having this crapola. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and they joined forces. So this is why I despise this two-party system, both Republican and Democrat. Because they are, they'll fight against each other, but when it comes time, they'll join forces and create this sense of bipartisanship. Yeah, bipartisanship means, I can't say it on the podcast radio, but bipartisanship it's flimsy and it's hypocritical at all points. So that's one thing that we'll never see someone obtain a third party anymore, because you gotta have a certain percentage to be at the national stage, and it's very sad to see that. Like other countries you see in the European political field, in the Central and South American political field, where you have various political parties and you give them a chance.
And I just to go all the way back to our first president, George Washington. If you read his farewell address, he warned against the spirit of party. He warned against what can happen when we devolve into this tribal politics that we are clearly in today. Bringing up Ross Perot and all the rules. I mean, this is what happens is then the Democrats and Republicans collude together to change the rules and make it impossible almost for third parties to get on the ballot, to get into debates and stuff like that. And then we get, now we have all these allegations that the Commission on Presidential Debates is rigged for the Democrats. Well, hey, Republicans, you guys are the ones who colluded with the Democrats to create this crap. So, why don't you look at yourselves for this so-called rigging of the presidential debates, and this is what you get for meddling in things that you shouldn't have meddled in the first place.
Yeah, and one thing I also like to bring, it creates this arena of populism and amateur theatrics. On the National Senate, we can bring up that whole arena of National Senate populism, but on the presidential field, it has created I would say a Greek theater of dramatics of attacking the personal side of a candidate instead of his issues. Oh, his wife cheated, or he has a transgender child, or he supports illegal immigration and has an illegal maid or illegal gardener. You're blowing away the real issues here and not targeting who this person is. I mean, who this person support. I look at when I saw George W. Bush and John Kerry, and I sat there because that was my first election, and I said to myself, really? Both of them are, they targeted John Kerry as a draft dodger, and he threw his medals in D.C., and yet I think John Kerry voted for the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, what is this? I mean, and then they're both supporting for national defense, national spending, and blah, blah, blah. And that's why I said, what? The hell? And then when I saw, of course, Barack Obama and John McCain, I go, really? Really? And it's just it's the same thing but different parties. And it's a shame also when I saw Obama and Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney did his own little version of Obamacare in Massachusetts. That's fine. He was kind of like the Calvin Coolidge of progressive politics in Massachusetts. But once Calvin Coolidge got to D.C., he was a different person. He did not get involved in various states. He just returned the money to the people in tax cuts and did very little regulations, very little, as far as conducted free trade with nations and all that. And I thought that was going to be the Mitt Romney. He's going to be like the Calvin Coolidge of Massachusetts. But turns out that he was just going to, continue on this big, massive federal government. Says, no, I'm not going to vote for that guy. And I'm not going to vote for Obama, which I didn't vote for Obama in '08. But it creates the same thing. It's just the only difference is an R and a D. But when you put them together, Trump, Biden, it's the same narrative. They're out there to make the federal government bigger in their own narrative, but the only thing that separates them, it's an R and a D. That's it.
Yeah, and the difference is, the way they're going to use the big government. They both want big government. They're going to use it in different ways. They're going to use it in a lot of cases in the same exact way. But, I just look at, I just wrote something for Substack this week about this fight to try and, protect girls' sport at a local school district in Wyoming. And, the conservatives that they push Title IX as Title IX is supposed to protect girls' sports. And I'm sitting here thinking, why are you looking towards Washington, D.C.? Title IX is crap. I mean, it should be scrapped. It should be eliminated. So they want to use Title IX to protect girls' sports. The left wants to use Title IX to allow transgenders into girls' sports. And I'm sitting here saying, what are we looking towards the government for anything related to youth athletics anyways? They shouldn't be saying anything. This is not the role of government. And, both sides, they just love big government. And the thing that bothers me with the right is the side that constantly talks about how much they believe in liberty. And, well, no, not if you're pushing big government. It creates this hypocrisy on the right that really bothers me because I can look at hypocrites on the left and not get too upset with them because that's not my side, not the side that I grew up with. So it's the hypocrites on the right that really frustrate me and get me upset.
Well, Title IX is a federal act.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is something that I always, in my books and my writings, why aren't states using their nullification power of legislation to nullify and refuse to cooperate with the federal government? Why are we looking up? I mean, this is something that, Convention of States don't do it. Nobody ever discussed that, states have that power to say, the law is still there. There is a federal law, but these states are not going to help you enforce it. We're going to refuse to cooperate, and we'll come up with something different. And this is something that the federal government has always meddled. If it wasn't for the federal government's National Senate, we wouldn't have had probably a civil war, and we would have probably probably would have been a minimal civil war, but we wouldn't have the drastic civil war. But it's always the meddling of the federal government that always gets everybody in trouble. Like if the Supreme Court would have just said to Wisconsin, hey, Wisconsin, if you want to give citizenship to Dred Scott, fine by me. No problem. You'll recognize him as a citizen. Later on, other states will recognize blacks as their citizens or residents or whatever and come in. People need to understand that this country was not founded as a unitary system, a centralized unitary system. We got out of that crap in 1776.
Yeah, and that also gets into, what was the system that the founders created. And something we discussed before starting this tonight is, they created a constitutional republic, but now we have everybody loves democracy, which is just, this is a big lie that we've been accepting for so long that we love democracy, and I don't.
No,
I
no.
do not. Yeah. I don't believe in the rule of the majority, the tyranny of the majority. we have rights. And it doesn't matter if the majority wants to take away my rights, they don't get to.
No, you're right, and I'm glad you brought that up, Seth, because I also loathe democracy and populism, because that's what democracy is populism. Populism is supposed to be people, but when you get this type of a populist ideologue, whether it's, well, I don't really consider Biden a populist, but Trump is a populist, Andrew Jackson is a populist that I despise, FDR, when you get those type of, and Woodrow Wilson is one that I call Trumpers a newly version of Wilsonian progressives when they talk about our threat to our democracy as lost. Or, I don't know if you catch the Dinesh D'Souza movie 20,000 Mules or 2,000 Mules.
I certainly heard about it, and I was encouraged to watch it, but I wasn't going to waste my time.
Yeah, no, me neither. And, the thing is that, Dinesh D'Souza, he quotes in his movie, "Without free and fair elections, we are not a democracy." Hello, we've never been one. We have free and fair elections, and they're guaranteed by the states to do it. But not by you, not by Trump, not by Biden, not by the FEC. So it's these, individuals like Dinesh or people from the left that they keep saying this, and it just makes my blood boil. That saying that we are a democracy. Since when? Since when do we let the people rule? We let the representatives represent us, and if we don't like that representation, we vote them out and we get new representation. That's a republic.
Yeah, and that's just the this is why I like I said at the beginning that I view voting as a privilege and not a right, and I can look at the 15th Amendment and agree with the intent of it that, that people of color were being denied their ability to vote. And that should never be a reason why somebody's not allowed to vote. But I also think the idea, one of the early things in the country was you had to be a property owner to vote. That makes sense to me to an extent. Because they're the ones that have skin in the game. They're the ones who are going to be taxed. At that time, we didn't have an income tax. But, to me, I wouldn't have a problem with, if you're a welfare recipient and you're taking tax dollars from others, which I don't think welfare should exist to begin with, but, it does. So, I don't know that if you're taking money from the taxpayers, should you have a right to vote? I'm not so sure about that, but I think about my rights, and I think about my right to speak. I think about my right to practice my religion. I think about my right to keep and bear arms. These are the rights I care about, but when we start pushing this lie of democracy, voting becomes the penultimate right. Everybody wants the right to vote, and that's the only right that matters. Well, all our other rights are being eroded. As long as you have your right to vote, that's all that matters to people. And to me, I want my right to speak. I want my right to keep and bear arms. I don't know if I really care much to vote anymore, because these politicians in both parties are just destroying all my other rights. So why am I going to vote for this?
Yeah, I think they should have added the 15th Amendment as part of the Bill of Rights. I think they should have placed it in the Bill of Rights, not make it a sole amendment. Because you're right, it is, people have cared so much about the right to this right to vote that they're being denied. You're right. You get this right to vote, but then politicians take away money out of your pocket because of the 16th Amendment. So that right is useless. That is useless because they don't care.
Yeah.
So no, you're right. You're right there. I mean, in the sense of who gets to the right to vote, I don't people who have property or not property, but at least living a meaningful life, felons or convicted felons should not get the right to vote because they don't deserve to live in a society if they're going to commit a crime, so they don't get that privilege. But it comes back to, again, how this country was established. And, back then, you didn't have a federal income tax. You had individual taxes from states and counties, and that's how it's supposed to be. But, you let the states decide, like I said, Wyoming, Montana, I think New Jersey, New York had women rights to vote, and women had the right to vote, and that's fine. Do we really need a national 19th Amendment? I mean, I'm not a sexist here. I'm not sexist. I'm just looking at how this country was established. You'll see that this country will progress to making it better, for making a more perfect union, and with ideas. In the end, slavery would have gone away, but what happened? The federal government intervened with the Fugitive Slave Act. So then slavery still kept. Women had the right to vote, and we were on the right path of having a lot of states on the right to vote and not have a national directive. But many Republicans, many progressive Republicans at that time wanted to chair that legislation. The same thing with the 18th Amendment. It was the Republicans who chaired that victory of prohibition of liquor. So it's this populism game that these two parties have created, that on the hint of democracy, on the hint of populism and temperance and whatever, it's just, you're right. Going back to what you said about George Washington, having this sense of partisanship is going to be the death of America.
Yeah, and just as you touched on, some states, women had the right to vote before the 19th Amendment, and it actually goes back to, I was reading something fairly recently that there were areas in this country back at the founding where women and Native Americans and black people, freed black people, were allowed to vote. If they were property owners. There was already people voting who were women and minorities right from the founding because it was done locally. There were, obviously a majority of the country did not allow it, but it was already here. So it's kind of this lie that they push that women never had the right to vote before the 19th Amendment. Well, that's not true. I'm not saying it was right that they were being denied it in certain parts of the country beforehand, but there were parts of the country that were allowing it.
And just to point that, women had more rights than blacks at that time. They had they were never denied their due process. I know I touched this on the 14th Amendment with the perfect example, Lizzie Borden. She butchered up her parents, but she got her day in court and she was acquitted. So, I don't see that women were oppressed in any kind. Women, I don't see that, women were in the fields as the black people were oppressed in the fields. Those were oppressed, but women were not. Women had rights. They had a right to go to schools. They had their own schools. Harvard didn't introduce co-ed until late in the 20th century. But that being said, I think many people are being bamboozled by certain politicians and put these certain ideas that don't really fit the narrative of how America was established. And now we're creating this narrative of, you don't want to lose your right to vote because your votes are not being counted. That's not true. Your votes are being counted depending on how you follow the instructions. It's something, one last thing I want to say is that it's something that Senator Day O'Connor said in Bush v. Gore, is that why don't we go to that standard when voters go in and follow the instructions, for goodness sakes? Why don't we just go to that standard? Follow the instructions of your state to vote, and your vote will definitely be counted. You're already punching your ballot, you're already rolling your ballot, punch it in. But my last note is, Seth, that in these recent years, people say, well, if you don't vote, you don't have a right to complain. And I hate when they do that. And, that's not true, because if I don't vote, I have a right to complain because I didn't put these morons in that you put them in. So you don't have that right to complain because you put in the Trumpers, you put in the Bidenites, you put the Obamas. I, on the other hand, did not vote, did not care to vote, so I have a right to complain because you brought that mess in and I didn't, and I have that right to complain. I have that privilege to complain of not to vote. Your last thought?
Yeah, and then I just say to that a lot of people their non-vote is their vote. That there are people who are paying attention. They are seeing what's going on with government, and they choose not to vote because they don't want to be part of it. So that's for me. I don't know how much I ever plan again to vote for federal elections, especially. I think we need to really start looking locally. And I think the most important person you vote on is sheriff. I think if you have a good sheriff who actually supports and defends the Constitution, they can help keep out a lot of the madness in your local area. But federally, I don't know that I'm ever going to vote again on any federal elections. I mean, I like Thomas Massey in Kentucky. I think he's generally been pretty good. I'd probably vote for him if I lived in his district for Congress. But, it's rare. There are very few people at the national level that I would take the time to go vote for. And that is my vote. Not voting is my vote.
Correct. No, you're right. I mean, I'm not going to give my vote to somebody that honestly, just because he has an R or a D. I mean, yeah, Tom, you mentioned Thomas Massey a couple of times. Yeah, I do have tended to like Thomas Massey and his speeches and his writings, and he does make some good points. But yet again, he has sided with Trump a couple of times. He has sided with the establishment. So. Many people say, well, who do you like nowadays? And I go, living or dead? Because there isn't none. To me, living, there is no fine politician. Dead, I can go back to Barry Goldwater, Robert Taft. You know what? Well, to some extent, Dennis Kucinich of Ohio, he did have some good pointers, but I wouldn't vote for him, but he has some good pointers. But anyway, it's just... Yeah, I'll just hold my vote as my right not to vote because it is my right. It is my privilege.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this 15th Amendment, and I hope you think long and hard when you go into the ballot box, and you really, really think long and hard who you want to vote for. And your last note, Seth?
And think very hard if you want to vote.
Exactly. Good. So, all right, well, we'll catch you next Sunday, and have yourself a great night.
Good night.